All right, folks, welcome into another great episode of I've Got a Theory. I'm Henish, your host, joined by Peter Levine, and I'm excited to talk to him because he's an expert author, researcher, does peer-reviewed articles. He reviews peer-reviewed articles and all kinds of great science stuff, especially in the fields of strokes and the brain and the science related to that. How am I getting that about right?
I think that's a probably pretty good broad definition of my career at this point.
Awesome. Well, hey, I'm really excited to talk to you because of all of the unknowns in the known universe. The human brain is probably right up there along with deep space and deep sea. What do you think?
It's often talked about exactly like that there's more going on in your brain in terms of neurons and synaptic connections than there are stars in the visible sky. So yeah, I think it's the great unknown, and it's right here, and we're thinking about it. So neuroscience is really on the bleeding edge of this idea that it's incredibly complicated and yet incredibly simple.
And
I mean,
it's not like there's one thing that can understand it, right? If we understand how the electrical impulses in our brain work, that doesn't cover it. If we understand how the chemical impulses in our brain work, that doesn't cover it. If we understand there's so many different aspects to how a brain works that you can't describe it in one way, huh?
That's true. And every time they try to make a computer model of it, they fail miserably.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happens with neurons, and I always use this as sort of this is the neuron cell body and the dendrites hanging off of it. The number of dendrites hanging off of the average number of dendrites hanging off of a neuron in a brain is 20,000. Now it can go up to 250,000. So just the capacity aspect of it is exponential. Not only that, but there's really long dendrites and there's really short dendrites. And the long dendrites decide what of the neurotransmitters get through to the short dendrites and actually even have a chance of providing an impulse. So if you're trying to make a computer analog of that, you can't do it because only some of the impulses get through. Actually, about a third to a quarter of them get through. There's a lot of neurotransmitters floating around, but not all the impulses get through. How are you going to make a computer that's binary? It's on, off, it's ones or zeros to replicate that kind of a thing.
And interesting point. So I have some thoughts on that, and you tell me if I'm way off base. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to state your theory, and then we'll kind of mold our episode around your topic there. So I know, Peter, even I know you've got a theory on this that associated with your research and your learnings that you could share. So tell me what you think.
My theory is that, and it's okay, we've talked about this. It's more of a hypothesis.
Sure, absolutely.
It's based in some things that we would consider theories. So it would be that the untapped potential of the human brain is that we don't know the potential of neuroplasticity. And we're just scraping the edges of the question at this point. So the theory is that it's way more neuroplastic than we give it credit for.
Okay, great. So let's define neuroplastic for me and other people that don't know the exact definition of that word.
So, so Aristotle put it this way, 2,400 years ago: we are what we repeatedly do. And, the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians and the Greeks, they made the same mistake. They thought that the brain was packing material to keep the head in a nice round shape.
They thought it was like the styrofoam in our head to
exactly.
That's why
they thought it was like very, very good styrofoam, very squishy styrofoam. And okay, so they
cut people open. So they cut people open and they knew it, right? I mean, so at a certain point they started poking around.
They did.
Do you think they ever did while awake conscious brain proddings surgeries? Because I know I've heard of people doing that even in modern eras where they'll do open brain surgeries while the patient's conscious.
Oh yeah. What's crazy about the brain is that once you pull back the skin, open up a flap in the skull, pull back the meninges, which is the thick leather-like covering that covers the brain, you can go in there with a needle or a scalpel. Sometimes they use suction because it's a very a gelatinous organ, so you can just suction stuff out if you want to do surgery. Once you get in there, you can do anything you want because they don't feel pain. You don't feel pain. The seat of pain doesn't feel pain. It's this great irony.
Well, we if anyone's seen, Silence of the Lambs, we've witnessed that firsthand with Hannibal Lecter and his victim. You remember that scene?
I don't, but
Oh,
I'm glad I don't.
I don't want to ruin it for you, but basically he does what you're describing and then does some horrible stuff.
Well, that's great.
Let's get back on track though. Anyway,
Yeah,
so you can't feel anything with your brain, but it's still an unknown and we're figuring things out. So there's a lot of body of research that's going along with this where people are having people do tasks or having them do work and plugging them into an MRI machine and seeing which areas are firing and things like that. What are you seeing in this world? What kind of cool stuff are you seeing coming through?
So here's a cool example of cool stuff that happens with functional magnetic resonance imaging. So typically, when we think of MRI, we think of that great static picture. It could be your knee, it could be your brain, it could be whatever. Overlying that, we can measure blood flow. And it's a lot of the studies that I've been involved in do exactly that. It's very expensive to do. You have to hire the person that's usually an MD, PhD to read this stuff. But the fact is that you can measure where blood is flowing on the original MRI template. And through that, we see that as an analog for neuroplastic change. So if a portion of the brain is being used, more blood flow flows to that portion of the brain. And then you measure that blood flow and you see if it expands over time.
Is that because the brain needs the oxygen that's in the blood to help it process faster or process at all?
Yeah, it's oxygen, it's glucose, and then it produces a tremendous amount of metabolites, so waste products that have to be taken away, and the blood does that work as well. So the more blood flow that's flowing there, I mean, look, there's actually a couple of videos online of neurons starting to connect with each other. Sometimes they'll travel up blood vessels to connect to other neurons, but that is it's done in animal models. You can see one happening, but you can't see this massive neuroplastic change that it takes for you to learn how to use Zoom or to type or to throw a football or whatever you're trying to do. So what we use is fMRI, which is an analog for that neuroplastic change. It's not the neuroplastic change, but we see it as a way of measuring how much brain is being used. And then we can surmise that there's more connections, more blood flow, more everything, more glial cells, a whole bunch of other stuff.
So with the untapped potential of our brain, I have a couple things that I've been thinking about with this that's changing in terms of your idea that a computer can't replicate a brain just yet. But one thing that's coming out is that computers are changing from binary to multi-state bits in the form of optical computers. How much have you read about optical computers?
Well, not much. I will tell you what the neuroscience says. Neuroscience says we're not there yet. Now, you know how computers are. They double in capacity
Every 18 months.
exponentially over time. And yeah, it gets crazy.
Yeah.
So who knows? They might be able to come up with something that does it. And certainly Elon Musk and others are pushing the boundaries of this stuff. It's just not there yet. The mechanistic view of the brain, that the brain is a machine, this goes back to Da Vinci. I mean, the lungs are bellows and the bones are levers and the muscles are pulleys and the kidneys are filters and the heart is a pump, and you got a bunch of machines, and you can have a fake heart, and you can have fake kidneys. It's called dialysis. And you can fake all of it. You can't fake the brain just yet.
Yeah.
But I mean, to your point, if they could do that, that would be amazing. Because you could then download your entire brain to this computer and maybe live forever.
That's the dream, right? Would you take, so Peter, if you had that option 10, 20, 30 years in the future, would you take that option?
Well, what are my options? Dying in that?
If that's your options, conventional death, burned or buried. And
do they really want me around that long? So now I'm burning through energy for the rest of my life. I have this huge carbon footprint. Look,
no. You just pay Amazon $10 or $20 a month for your cloud storage for your brain, and you get to pop up every time your family's going shopping.
I'm offloading that to my kids and my grandkids. They don't want me around that long. Look, every 100 years, the planet Earth washes itself of human beings, so we can start over, and they can have the same damn problems that we had. give it to the kids. I don't want to live forever.
Well, I know you probably read a lot in general for your profession, but probably for personal use as well. One of my favorite books that I read in the last few years that one of my friends that's a former NASA scientist and now, runs a satellite company had me read, and we book club together, was Dan Brown's Origins. And Dan Brown is the Da Vinci Code guy, Angels and Demons, right? So along that stream of thought, that same main character, have you read any of his Dan Brown books? Those, um, oh, you haven't? Okay. They're pretty good. They're like page turner, quick reads you can do in 3 or 4 hours, probably faster if you're a fast reader. But he wrote this one recently a few years ago called Origins. And in it, he discusses, a character is like the Elon Musk in the character, and he develops a special computer that does, what am I calling them? Computer simulations from the past through the future. And the key with this computer that he creates is that there's 2 lobes. He creates a computer with 2 lobes, just like our brain. And one lobe is the fastest conventional computer. And the other lobe is the newest optical computer that you can get. And so he says, with those 2 lobes, they balance each other out with the creativity and the rationality. And with that was able to come up with kind of human-based artificial intelligence that was able to do simulations for millions or billions of years in the past and millions of billions of years into the future and run multiple simulations. So it's really interesting the kind of findings that he comes up with in this fictional book, obviously kind of loosely based on science, but it just gives you optimism that oftentimes fiction turns into nonfiction.
Absolutely.
Right. We can see, yesteryear's science fiction novels turning into science fact nowadays. Right. So it doesn't seem too far-fetched that in your lifetime, in my lifetimes, in our lifetimes, that we're going to see some incredible advancements in this. Is there any thoughts on what you think that we could uncover, the levels of understanding that we could get in potential development capacity, what we can accomplish?
Well, first of all, let me just address something that a lot of people believe is true and is not true, that somehow the left hemisphere is about logic and the right hemisphere is about artistic creativity. That's a bunch of bull. And it came out in an article in 1970 in Time, and it turned out that the author had been debunked, and it's just, that's not the way the brain works.
Okay, good to know. All right.
Yeah. So like a good thing that you can do is there's some great videos online. If you just search fMRI music, and it's Finnish researchers. My wife is from Finland. And so anytime Finland comes up, I'm like, it's Finland.
Yeah.
And they do fMRI on people listening to music that they love. And you'll note that there's no part of the brain that isn't lighting up. It's just flowing. The hemisphere, it doesn't care about hemispheres. It doesn't care about the cerebellum or the amygdala or the hippocampus. It just goes all over the place doing what it does. And so that left-right hemisphere thing, let's do away with that.
Okay, sounds good. I won't propagate that old rumor anymore.
Yeah, I mean, math on the left side. Well, the right side's involved too. I mean, they're both involved.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So to your question, I mean, I don't really know much about this stuff, but it seems like Elon Musk, what is it called?
Neuralink and stuff.
Neuralink. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good start, because my area of interest is brain injury. So if you can find a way to get somebody to overcome the deficit that exists in the brain in a portion by allowing an offload or an upload of something, I think that would be great. I mean, I think he had a monkey playing a video game
with his brain.
Yeah.
Which is incredible.
Now, if you can't use your hands, that's probably a pretty good thing to do, because now they do this with spinal cord injured patients. They'll hook something into their brain, but it's
operate arms.
And it's this big clunky thing, and it's horrible. It looks terrible, and it has an external port. Whereas Elon Musk is a tiny little chip, and you put it in there, it stays in there forever, and you Bluetooth it. So that kind of stuff is intriguing. I just think it's like a lot of things. It takes a while for it to get traction, and once it does, it just rolls downhill really fast. I think sometimes that now is not a great time to be alive. I mean, here we are struggling with Windows 10 or whatever. If you wait 500 years, you're not even know what system you're using, it's not going to matter. It's going to be seamless. And so unfortunately, we're at the beginning of this process, but it'll get better.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why, if I did have the option to live forever, it would be just to witness it, just to see what we can accomplish, and even if they said, hey, we're just going to give you a few more hours of an hour 100 years into the future, and an hour 200 years in the future, just to see, like, holy cow, look what we've accomplished, because I think it could be incredible, as long as we haven't blown each other up yet.
That's true. I don't think we will.
I hope not.
It's
I hope
getting
not,
better.
because that's one of the theories out there of why aliens don't exist, is because at a certain level of development in any kind of intelligent race, some madman gets a hold of the bomb and blows everyone up before they're able to expand out. That's one of the theories that are out there. I don't know if you knew that.
That's really sad. I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, I mean, the theory is that in a world where anything is possible, over the course of 1 billion odds or 7 billion odds, the odds that one madman gets a hold of it and does something bad exists. So anyways,
Sure.
that's a little tangent.
Or
That's
7 billion madmen.
Rabbit hole of theories I go down.
All right.
Okay, so next question. You mentioned music and how it lights up your brain. One of my prior guests enlightened me on the world of cymatics. Have you heard of this?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's really incredible. And it's basically the theory that sound waves can create healing. And there's a lot of videos on that as well. And so, one of the more common videos that you'll see are someone playing a certain frequency in the 400 hertz range or something like that. And at certain frequencies, they can put like a sound plate under a plate with some sand on it, and the sand like forms really nice geometric patterns, which is kind of surprising. And the same type of thing happens with water. And the theory is that can kind of dribble down into your cells or into humans. And now they're starting to evidence this in farming, and they're putting through certain frequencies of sound through the soil and finding that plants respond better and will grow better and will be more resilient just because of cymatics and sound influence on them. So, I think there's going to be a body of research that's starting to come into that where, and it's not too far-fetched, because we use ultrasound currently to heal damaged fibers and stuff like that, right? So it's along the same, same, I wouldn't say wavelength, because it's a different wavelength, but the same type of idea.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. A little bit over my pay grade. I would say the structure of cells in the body would disallow a quick rearrangement of things, but maybe there's a there. We use ultrasound typically for diagnostic stuff. There is a ultrasound treatment option that's used in physical and occupational therapy.
Correct. Yeah.
That provides heat. But yeah, I don't know much about that.
Oh, all good. I was just kind of sharing some things to kind of just, drum up your brain a little bit. So next thought I had, this neuroplasticity that I'm seeing some research on. There was a really good article that came out last year on Fortune magazine, was the growing and interesting world of research regarding psychedelics and how that impacts the brain and neuroplasticity and opening up areas of the brain that typically might not have been fired without the introduction of a psychedelic within that realm. I'm assuming you've seen some research there?
I have. I'm really interested in LSD in particular for migraine headaches and other kinds of headaches. And I know maybe where you're getting at is the trauma, people that have had post-traumatic stress disorder, and all of a sudden it seems to alleviate. It is unfortunate that the idea that somebody may get high, stops this kind of research. I know for headaches, they can't even do it in the United States because somebody may get high. And so a lot of it's done in Germany. And as somebody who suffers from headaches, it's a burden. Some of this stuff for headaches will get rid of the headache for months. One dose gets rid of the headaches for months, and they can take the hallucinogen aspect out of it and still come up with a drug that will help. And yet, because of the whole, I don't know what's going through people's heads, they're so afraid of everything. But I can tell you headaches are terrible, but I don't think that's what you were getting at. I think you were talking about like maybe opening doors of perception kind of a deal.
Yeah. I mean, other things, the PTSD is one thing, but I know depression is another. And I know a feeling of connectedness is another. I think that I've read a lot that people get new and novel ideas that might help them personally or professionally while under the influence of LSD or other psychedelics. it's not just let's dance funky to weird music type things. Like there's a lot of other applications that, done properly, done under the right supervision, done with the right intent, or probably with the right dosing and things like that. Once it's understood better, I feel like, native peoples and Aboriginal peoples and, even all peoples for thousands of years probably use these under the premise of a witch doctor, right? That didn't probably have a full understanding of it, but some basic understanding of it, because you still see it happening, right? In Central and South America, or you can go to Africa and they've got these shamans and witch doctors that will prescribe weird things to you. And by and far, it seems like people have fairly positive experiences from it, and probably opens up some things in their brains. And I'm starting to see research that comes through where they're giving, patients or people that are willing to undergo these treatments, these different drugs of different sorts, and putting them in an fMRI machine and seeing how their brain's firing up and seeing what kind of impacts it have, or if that's healing for them as well, right? Because when I know one of your premises is the neuroplasticity and healing after stroke, right? It's kind of one of your specialties. I'm wondering if there's some applicable treatments there. And I don't know a whole lot about stroke. Maybe you can explain kind of a little bit what a stroke is and how that impacts a person, because unless you know someone that's had it or had it yourself, it's not something that people are too familiar with.
Right. So it's a form of acquired brain injury. It falls under this umbrella of acquired brain injury. Acquired brain injury is anything that mechanically hits your brain, whether it hits your brain internally, like a stroke does, where a blood vessel blocks or a blood vessel bursts, a hemorrhagic or a ischemic stroke, or if you get hit in the head with a baseball bat, have a car accident, and you have your head jostles around in your brain, which has the consistency of jello, gets tumbled around in the brain, and you have, so those mechanical ones are called acquired brain injury, and stroke is one of those forms of acquired brain injury. It is a block in an artery that leads to the brain or is in the brain, or it's a blown blood vessel in the brain. And when you blow a blood vessel, this is a much rarer form of stroke. It's only about 10%. Most of them are blocks. But when you blow a blood vessel, the blood gets into the brain. And of course, neurons love brain. You have about 5 liters of blood in your body, and about 20 to 25% of all the blood that you have goes through your brain at any one time. So if you look at a fresh brain, it's very red. It has a lot of vascularization. So neurons love blood unless it crosses over the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is just the wall of the artery or the arteriole. So as soon as it goes on to the neurons, then it starts to kill neurons. So both kinds of strokes are very dangerous.
Wow.
But you have, what's always been interesting right back to Hippocrates about stroke is that it's always one area of the brain. If you have a car accident, typically it's not that controlled.
It could be anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. It could be a ton of different places. Whereas stroke typically is one spot. And then you see the deficit on the other side of the body typically. So it's kind of weird. The right side of the brain controls the left side of the body and vice versa. When you learn this in school, you're just pissed off because it's just one more thing you would think it would go straight down, but it doesn't. It crosses over.
Sure.
So typically,
is that the case in all animals, or is that unique for us?
In all mammals, it crosses over.
So there must have been some evolutionary benefit to that.
There was. And I was just listening to a podcast about this. One of my favorite podcasts is the Brain Science Podcast, which is run by an MD, Ginger Campbell. And they were talking about an evolutionary advantage of having the redundancies of both sides. I mean, an obvious one is if I have 2 eyes, maybe I have 2 eyes going in different directions, or I have larger peripheral vision. If you have 2 lobes, they can both be doing their own thing, but they can also work together, as you were suggesting before. So yeah, there is advantages to bilaterality.
Yeah. Aha. Okay. So anyways, going back to the stroke, so if you're bleeding out into your head, that's bad. The other ways that they block, I thought were like air bubbles, or is it cholesterol? What causes a blockage in a brain vessel that would cause a stroke?
So cholesterol can be one of them. One of the worst things that you can do, of course, is smoke. And a
Mm.
good example is what smoking does. And the other thing that does it too, and I've read both of the descriptions and they look very similar. NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, Advil, Aleve, acetaminophen, all those things, that over-the-counter stuff does similar kinds of things. And that's why they changed the warning. I have a bottle of Aleve around here someplace, but they changed the warning to say, be careful with this stuff. So smoking and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories do the same kind of thing. They chip away at the arterial wall. Now, as soon as you chip away at that, it sets out this cytokinins and these other chemicals that then look for help to patch up where it's chipped out of the arterial wall. And what happens is the cholesterol, which part of its job is to patch those things up, gets stuck there. And then other things get coagulated over it, and you form this thrombus or this embolus that then clogs the artery. So typically about 85% of all strokes are exactly that. It's either a block in an artery in the brain or leading to the brain, or it's something called an embolus that starts maybe in your lower legs. I'm sure you've heard of this. You have these clots that can travel when you travel. You've been sitting for a long time and the clot breaks off and it goes in your lungs and you have a pulmonary embolism, or it goes up to your brain and you have a head embolism, you have a stroke. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to vector a stroke into somebody.
Wow. And so mention that again, because you mentioned that our over-the-counter drugs that we can take, and you mentioned Aleve and Tylenol, but what about like aspirin? I thought they were saying that you're supposed to take a half an aspirin a day to prevent a stroke.
And that's exactly why they didn't change it on aspirin, because they didn't want people to stop taking aspirin. Now, if it's a baby aspirin, as you're supposed to do for a little bit of blood thinning, it's probably a good thing. There's, I work clinically right now in a rehab environment for people that have orthopedic pain, and they just pop these things like it's candy. And all I'm saying is that they do have an effect on arterial health. Be careful with that and try not to do them if you can find another way to alleviate pain. But yeah, they changed. Look at a Aleve bottle. I got mine right here, and read the back of it, and it'll say warning. These things can be, not great for your vascular system. Be careful. But they didn't put it on aspirin because they didn't want people to stop taking aspirin for exactly the reason that you're talking about.
Wow. Okay. So let's put a disclaimer out there that neither of us are your physician and you shouldn't be taking medical advice from us, but please look into it further. Let's always put that disclaimer out there that don't take it on me and say that Henish told me to not take my aspirins. But so it's worth looking into to figure this out further, and how it impacts you. And ideally your primary care physician would be able to advise you properly, because this is information that's now spread out there. This is news to me, but ideally your regular physician should know this kind of stuff, right? Like maybe you shouldn't be taking 2 to 6 Advil a day because you've got some chronic pain.
Right.
Or if you do, know that there could be consequences, and you should try to find an alternative to alleviate that pain more naturally, potentially.
This is why docs get paid the big bucks.
Yeah.
They can help you make those decisions. Absolutely.
Yep. Okay. So we kind of dove away from the psychedelics and the LSD research that you were talking about a little bit. And I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit more, because I feel like there's probably some more benefits on that. And you're right. I mean, there's been a lot of dissuasion of using these kind of tests because people might have a little bit too much fun experimenting with them, but there are real and valid positive side effects of this stuff that should be researched further and encouraged to be researched further, because derivatives could be made that aren't giving you a high, but could give you all the medical side effects or benefits that could expand your brain, reduce headaches, reduce depression, reduce anxiety, and get you to feel overall better, as opposed to taking pharmaceutical grade antidepressants or anti-anxiety pills or anti-headache pills or something like that. Does that seem possible in the near future?
I mean, it does, but don't expect the American system to be able to step up to that, because if there's not a buck to be made, it's going to be tough.
Sure.
This is why in Germany, where they do have everything, I think all of their healthcare is private but it's not for profit. That's the thing. So, there is an unholy alliance between MDs. God bless them; they save our lives. But them and pharmaceutical companies, and it's unfortunate because if something does work, like if you would say that a non-hallucinogenic form of LSD would reduce headache pain and it lasts a window of about 3 months. Well, what's the company that makes Aleve going to think about that? And
Sure.
what about all the people that are on Prozac because they have these terrible headaches that knock them out of their life every day or two? And then what about Botox, Allergan, the company that makes Botox? Because Botox, so you're wiping out huge industries, because you may have come up with something that's very effective. But this is something that we've talked about for 40, 50 years in this country. It's a real problem. So I think I know where you're headed with this, but I'm not sure the United States is, or pharmaceutical companies are going to support the kind of research. And meanwhile, they're going to point their plastic fingers at everybody and say, don't do that stuff because it's bad science, Well,
Right. Yeah, there'll be some negative propaganda against it. Because even just yesterday, I was reading that there are starting to be bills assembled and put together for nationwide federal acceptance of marijuana, which is a little bit different, But I'm glad that they're opening that up because it's kind of, the gateway drug to other gateway drugs that could be researched further instead of just put into the closet and saying these are all bad and there's no medically acknowledged reasons to use them, right? That's kind of what the class A narcotics are, right? The LSDs, the mushrooms, et cetera, that have said years ago, scientists have discovered that there's no benefit to this and we're never going to allow even research on it. Well, now that's starting to slowly shift and allowing people to research it a little bit in isolated areas. And as they've done with marijuana, they're starting to see a lot of ways they can extract the medicinal benefits with CBDs or other aspects of it, take out the high aspect and really give people some relief in whatever kind of issue they might have, depending on what it's being prescribed for. Right? Are you starting to see that as well?
it's interesting the way you use the term gateway drug, because usually if you hear about a gateway drug, but you're talking about on the flip side, that
Correct.
it's a gateway to, maybe some
Science-based
therapeutic.
research. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, and opening the doors to saying, hey, let's flip the script, reverse the trend, and see what we've missed here all along that has been provided by the planet. Or in LSD's case, it was kind of a byproduct. I remember reading the history of it, and it was kind of a byproduct of something else, and it turned out to have these effects. Done by like a researcher, right? Probably a long time ago, almost probably 70, 80 years ago when LSD was invented, right? What do you know about that?
Timothy Leary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's back in the 60s. Yeah,
Okay.
and maybe even earlier. There's some great videos online of a woman that took LSD as an experiment. It was a government experiment, and it's a black and white video, and it's just fascinating watching her trip because she really enjoys it, and she talks about there's no separation between me and you, or me and anything else. So if you can find that black and white video of a woman tripping in the 50s, it's just a fascinating thing.
Yeah. They say it can create like a oneness type thing and a collectivism and a collective consciousness when you're tripping on these kind of things.
Well, there's a dangerous concept right there. I mean, what happens then? We're not going to have the 1 out of 7 billion people that are going to blow up their planet Earth if we're all connected, because he's going to feel connected to everything.
Ideally, right? I mean, it's
radical ideas.
Extremists are born out of the ideology that they're alone and that they're separate and that they're that no one understands them, right? But if that wasn't the case, you'd have a few less psychos out there, right? And that's the kind of the thing. I mean, we hear this every day in the United States with these gunmen, and they're always lone gunmen, right? It's not like there's like an organized group of them that are all buddies. It's always like one crazy person that's going to shoot up someplace, and a lot of it stems from loneliness and depression, I'm assuming.
Listen to us. I think we're a couple of old hippies.
Let's just hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I mean, you're not going to want to, you can't pick up a gun at that point.
Yeah. I mean, and pot, nobody goes in a mass murder spree on pot. You too busy eating donuts and watching TV.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean, there's different
yeah,
ways that people manifest it, but yeah, I mean, it's typically not something that makes people violent, right? It's not like back
right.
in the day when you say like, oh, this person's on PCP and he's knocked out 4 cops and he's running through walls, right? It's not that kind of drug, and I know things like that exist, but there's so many other drugs out there that just get lumped together by people that are unaware. They're like, oh, all drugs are bad. I'm like, no, all drugs are different. They're all different and they do different things, and some are beneficial, some aren't, some have beneficial aspects and some have side effects as well. So there's a lot to it. Well, Peter, we've been chatting for a while. I mean, this has been super interesting and enlightening to learn about some of the things about the brain and some of the things you're discussing. Anything further that you wanted to talk about with the capacity of the brain and how neuroplasticity works, and anything that people can do as like a tip or a takeaway after listening to this to make sure that their brain is working as best as possible? Are there exercises we could do? Are there, stopping smoking, reducing your pain medication addiction, whatever it could be? What would you say that are some things that simple steps that maybe you take or that you'd advise others to take to make sure your brain's functioning well for the next, for the full 100 years of your life?
That is a ginormous subject, but I'll leave you with one quick experiment. I'll make it as quick as possible and no quicker. It's from Alvaro Pasqualione, a great neuroscientist at Harvard. And what he does is he gets a person that has perfect vision and gets them into an fMRI machine and brushes the pad of the right index finger with a loofah. So they have a tech in there and they're scanning the brain and they brush the index finger. And the right side index finger shows up right about here. And so this person's wired normally. And then they blindfold her for the next 100 hours and they teach her Braille, which uses that same fingertip. Okay. After the 100 hours, they scan her brain again, brushing this. And instead of taking a little portion right here, it takes up the entire occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is where vision exists. This person now, because they're reading, their whole visual cortex is taken over a single fingertip, or a single fingertip has taken over the whole visual cortex.
So they're basically seeing with their finger now.
Exactly. 100 hours. So my message to you is this stuff doesn't take, years and years of practice. A lot of the stuff is quick, intensive bursts. Think about boot camps that you can get involved in. Like if you want to get better at basketball, being a weekend warrior is great. But what about those camps that they have for old guys like us that want to learn to shoot hoops better? That's
Do they
probably
have that? Because I'm going to sign up. I play basketball twice a week still.
Yeah, I don't, because
Okay.
I'm too old. But
I understand. Yeah.
but I loved it. Pickup basketball is great, but if you go to a camp where it's intensive over a week, you'll find your game will increase a lot faster than if you kind of do it.
Right, for sure. Yeah, it's kind of the truth with anything, right? If you can coach or focus on it or get someone to give you a hand on it, I mean, you can definitely make huge strides and improvement on that. So, it's an interesting takeaway, is that you can mold your mind faster than you would think.
Yes.
Right. And train it faster than you could think. And I remember years ago when those Lumosity games came out and stuff like that, and your little things on your cell phone that you can keep your brain sharp, and they tell you to play Sudoku or do the not the word search. What's the other one called? The crossword puzzles and stuff like that. Those probably, once you get into a rhythm, it probably keeps activating the same parts of your brain. But the goal would be maybe to figure out different things you could do to activate different regions of your brain.
Right. The problem with those games typically is that they make you better at those games.
Exactly.
And there's not a lot of research that says they extrapolate to other things in your life.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, but there's probably got to be is there any research associated with how much you use your mind or how many different ways you use your mind and the reduction of, say, Alzheimer's or other late stage diseases like dementia or things like that are kind of mind-based diseases that you could stave off or delay or prevent with the proper brain exercises? Yeah,
so there's some good research with regard to Alzheimer's, and it's the NUN study. If you want to look up the NUN study, it's an easy study to find. And they followed nuns because they had a long arc of time to look at stuff that they wrote back in school and the essay they wrote to become nuns, and they had a lot of data to work with. And what they found was there was correlation between education increasing and Alzheimer's decreasing. So education will help with that. The other thing was that these nuns, after they retired, and most of them were teachers, they continued to be engaged. They had to, they wanted to be engaged. And so they were doing dishes and they were cooking together and they were doing all these things, helping each other out. It's all that stuff that's going to keep your brain young, because when they did the only way truly to look at Alzheimer's, to diagnose it, is once you're dead, and they open it up and they find out that the cortex is shrunk and the whole brain is shrunk. So these women would often technically have Alzheimer's, but they never showed the symptoms. They would pass the mini mental and all these cognitive tests just fine. So you can have Alzheimer's, but still building these redundancies by being engaged throughout your life. So there's a lot of potential. Keep learning, maybe keep learning, whatever that means to you, but be intensive about it. Like, be serious about it, whatever it takes.
That's awesome. Yeah, of course. I mean, because if you can't use your brain, there's nothing else is really relevant, right?
I would say that would be the last thing I would want to lose. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You could take my finger, you could take my foot, you could take my knee. Yeah. But if I can't think, shoot, because Elon Musk is strapping circuits in. If I could play video games or put me into a robot, kind of android or something, and next thing I know, I'm just a walking brain. I mean, it doesn't sound ideal, but if it's, compared to the next option, it's not horrible.
I think there was a Star Trek episode about that.
There's a lot of science fiction about that, right? Kind of pulling your brain out and putting it into a robot and living indefinitely or something like that. I mean, it doesn't seem impossible. And I'm sure he'll do that with the monkey brain in the next year. And humans won't be far behind when they start doing that research in, say, Southeast Asia, where they're a little bit more liberal with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then he'll send us all to Mars. It'll be great.
Wow. Hey, Peter, really appreciate you spending some time with me and sharing some of your ideas and really expanding my mind on some interesting topics and correcting some fallacies that I had about right and left brain and pain meds and stuff like that. And also knowing that there's new things coming through in the forefront of brain education and research we're going to see a lot of interesting changes over the next few years. And I think we'll get to witness it. I know you mentioned earlier that, we're living in a tough time because we don't get to see it. You'd rather see 500 years in the future, but I think we're seeing it right now. I think we're seeing it as fast as we can manage with all the research coming through. Could we use 10 times more of it? Yeah. Do we wish we spent more money on science than we did on bombs? Yeah. But we live in the world we live, and hopefully they can start making that shift and spending less money on defense from each other and more on science and research that could help humanity as a whole. That's my goal as well.
Amen, brother.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's another great episode of I've Got a Theory. Thanks for joining me. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Catch you next time.